happy to present on this topic because I think there's so much information out there about how we can be more inclusive, about women empowerment. Um, and when you think about women empowerment, so many different things can come to mind. And I kind of wanted to shed some light on things that maybe aren't talked about enough, or just a refresher on some things that maybe you've learned already, but are still really important. Okay, so the title for today's presentation is We're All One, Breaking Barriers and Empowering Each Other. Okay, so I wanted to start with a quote by Bell Hooks. Bell Hooks is one of my favorite American authors, social justice advocates, etc. She said, "I will not have my life narrowed down. I will not bow down to somebody else's whim or to someone else's ignorance." Bell Hooks was a really important figure in the Black community in creating more inclusive and radical ways of relating to one another and what it means to be a woman in our society. And I really recommend her work. So we're going to go over a couple of things today. We're going to go over just a Gender Studies 101, talking about gender norms, gender roles, and more. Then we'll talk a little bit about intersectionality. It's a big word, but it's pretty simple to understand. Then some brief history and how women empowerment or inclusivity is viewed today. We have to talk about trans advocacy, so we'll definitely be going over that, and then some ways to be more inclusive. I really would like for all of us to just have an open mind during these conversations, and I would like for it to be engaging. So anytime if you have a comment, maybe like a story that you want to share that's relevant, I really encourage that. Okay, so we're going back to the basics. If anyone here has taken like gender studies class in college or even in other spaces and trainings and things like that, you'll know that gender is a spectrum, or it's very complicated. And so gender simply is the characteristics of women, men, girls, and boys that are socially constructed. And that's a really big point here, is that it's a social construct. And so sometimes when we hear about that, we could feel maybe a little bit like uncomfortable, because since the days we were born and had consciousness at whatever age, you're taught that if you're a girl, you wear pink dresses and you play with Barbies, or if you're a boy, you might like trucks or to like rough house or something like that. And so gender is actually a very sensitive topic. It means a lot to people. And so it's normal for you to learn about these new things and kind of feel uncomfortable, or kind of feel like, your whole life was a lie because you were told certain things. But it's actually can be really fun also, because it is a spectrum. There's so much room for you to be curious about it, for you to learn more about it, for you to challenge yourself in your gender expression, etc. And so since it is a spectrum and it has different characteristics throughout your life, it could change over time. And I think more recently we started to hear more about gender expression or different forms of gender identity, maybe through your universities or in your workplace, where you hear people asking, okay, like introduce yourself and your pronouns. I think we're really lucky to be in a space like how I am in Prevention Links, working for NJ4S, where, on our ID badges for work, it has our pronouns, or when we introduce ourselves in trainings or, a meeting, you might ask, what's your name and what's your pronouns? So that's something that's been really popular lately, and I'm very happy about that. Some people even put their pronouns in like their Zoom names, which just makes it more inclusive. And so when we think about gender, we have certain associations with it. So I want to ask you guys, when you think about, a teenage girl living in the United States, what do you normally think of? Maybe right away you think about someone that's in cheerleading or at a ballet recital. But do you think about a teenage girl in the United States playing rugby or playing even football, or something, more known to be something that men do? Not really. And it's not really your fault either. It's not your fault that you have these biases or you have these automatic associations to what a teenage girl would be doing with her free time, such as like sports, hobbies, etc. With gender, we have to talk about gender norms. Gender norms are a set of ideas governing how women, men, boys, and girls should act. This could be something like men are the defenders and should be the only ones with careers in the military, or that women should be the ones in childcare, should be teachers, should be nannies, etc. These are things that are different between every culture. So every culture has a different set of gender norms. In some cultures, it is more of like a matriarchy where the women have more power and make more decisions. In other cultures, it's not so like that, where, men are the ones that are the ones that have to make all decisions and dictate the things around the house or in society. But it is different all throughout time and history. And I was even talking to one of my coworkers the other day that in ancient Egypt, for example, women were seen as really strong people in the household. They were given a lot of rights and decisions to make their own choices in their lives. And so that is something that's kind of been different throughout time. I think at a certain point, it started to become where men are given that role, but it wasn't always like that. And still today, there are roles where women have more power. With gender norms, there's gender roles, and these two are different. Gender roles are stemmed from gender norms, and so these are more of the behaviors or the roles that are considered appropriate to each particular gender, such as that women should be responsible for cooking, cleaning, and taking care of children. And I just want to mention that in some cultures or even religions, it's kind of dictated what men or women should do, and that is perfectly okay, to each their own. Even though some things such as religion or culture dictate gender norms and gender roles, I want this to just be a time where we can understand that it doesn't have to be like that, or it's not like that for everyone. So it's okay that in certain cultures or religions, men and women are assigned different roles, but we can't expect every single culture or religion to follow those norms. And that's why it's a big point of making that clear. So I talked a little bit about the gender norm or gender role of women and men. Can we all think about some other examples of gender roles or gender norms? Rachel says men being the primary breadwinner. Yes, that pressure is on a lot of men for sure. Zoe says housewives. Absolutely. Women doing all the childcare, boys using blue colors. Yeah, definitely. These are all things that still exist in our society today. And I remember when I was first learning about gender norms and roles, I got a little upset. I'm not gonna lie. I was like, it's not fair. It's not fair that all throughout our lives we're told that we have to be a certain way, and then you come to realize that it's not like that. It's actually all made up, and there's no right way of going about your gender expression. Men doing handiwork, men being the provider, protector, men doing caretaking chores. And we can see how all of this brings a lot of pressure on not just men, but women as well. I think we mostly talk about how there's so much pressure on women, I think. And because this is, a webinar on women, we can't talk about women if we're not talking about men. We can't talk about men if we're not talking about women. All of it is interconnected. And so I really do appreciate everyone's comments, and hopefully we can continue to push against these norms and make it more acceptable and normalized for people to do other things that are not typically assigned to their gender role. So now I would like for us to take 3 minutes to take this little gender roles test. You can scan the QR code, or if you need me to, I can put the link in the chat. And basically, this quiz just gets you comfortable with answering questions about your femininity or your masculinity, and see where you lie. So sometimes we don't even take the time to really think about our form of expression, and it can be a little uncomfortable, but I want to just make it a little bit more normalized to ask questions about yourself, answer questions about yourself, and see where you lie. So if we can take the next 2 to 3 minutes to take this quiz, and then we'll share our thoughts in a little bit. And you won't have to share your results. You can just share how you feel about your results. So please answer as honestly as you would like. Okay, I'll give it another minute or so. Okay, let's bring it back in. How do we feel about that? Does anyone have any insights they'd like to share? Did you learn anything new? Did anything surprise you?
I'll comment on this. I think I was very surprised because mine says I'm androgynous masculine leaning, which I think I'm not that masculine. I'm not masculine in the sense of like what society would deem like masculine. So I was very surprised because I do see why it's saying that, but at the same time, it's kind of like it's just interesting to me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Armando. And I mean, these are 20 questions, right? So, we are not just, a 20 question type of person where we can get a result of our identity through those short amount of questions, but it's definitely a good starting point. So I appreciate you sharing that, Armando. Did anyone else want to share?
Yeah, I
I
can
did.
share.
Okay, go ahead, Julia.
You can go first, doesn't matter.
Yeah, I was just gonna go because mine was the same as Armando, which was androgynous masculine leaning. And the funny thing is, my husband always tells me I'm half a guy. He's always like, "You're half a dude." So I was like, "Oh, I guess that's why he says that."
Very interesting.
I love
Thank you for
that.
sharing.
I got feminine leading androgynous, which I don't feel surprised by. I grew up around all boys. I have no sisters. I have no like older, other than my mother, no like older like woman figure. So it says I display both masculine and feminine characteristics. And I really like that because like I said, I grew up around all men, and I grew up around all very good men, luckily for me. So I like to think that I took all the good characteristics of being stereotypically masculine and all the good characteristics of being stereotypically feminine. It says I can benefit from identifying their true desires and re-examining their worth, which is definitely something that I agree with. While I do lean feminine, I definitely can see like my worth in the femininity and the worth in the masculinity that is in my life. So, yeah.
Thank you, Julia, for sharing. I like what you mentioned about the worth in both, because I think sometimes we like to think, oh, like, I'm a woman, and so, I have these feminine traits, and I don't want to appear or say anything that might come off as too masculine. But there really is a power in kind of leaning into both and being okay with expressing both. I see some people agreeing in the chat, and that's great. I'm really glad it resonates. And so, another thing that I wanted to mention about femininity and masculinity is that, I like in the introduction mentioned, I'm really into astrology, and astrology is, known as one of the oldest sciences, and people are, take it with a grain of salt. But for me, I grew up on astrology, and it's actually really important in my family, and we talk about it often and all of that. And so in astrology as well, there's like masculine signs and feminine signs. And people like to think, oh, like I'm a Taurus, so I have, I can't relate to any other signs. But really, when you get into astrology, you see that there's a whole chart of signs. And so you're not just a Gemini, you're not just a Taurus, you're so many other signs. And so you'll be surprised if you know your chart, you can see, oh, all of these signs are masculine, all of these signs are feminine, and there's just a mix, a beautiful blend of all signs. Armando, you have something to say?
Yeah, I was gonna say to comment on that. It's funny because my polarity is very feminine. So to see that I have a lot of masculine traits, I was very like, I don't know if that's because I'm an earth sign, but I feel like that's very interesting how, like you said, there is that blend that, basically combines both traits together.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really fascinating, and I encourage you all to look more into it, not just astrology, but just about how you relate to femininity and masculinity, and how being aware of, your relation to it can make you more accepting of yourself, more accepting of other people, and to just celebrate all types of expression. And so the Trevor Project is an organization that's actually the leading organization for suicide prevention and in the queer community. And so on their website, they kind of put some questions that you can ask yourself if you are questioning your gender, which is super okay. Such as, how do you feel about your birth gender, right? So we're born either male or female. And so how do you feel about that? Do you relate to it? Do you agree with it? What gender do you wish people saw you as? I think that's a really big one. Maybe a question for a journaling session at home or something like that. How would you like to express your gender? That can be with how you speak, with your clothes. What pronouns are you most comfortable using? And when you imagine your future, what gender are you? So these are some, reflective questions that you can ask yourself if you are curious about, questioning your gender or going a little bit more deeper. I know when I first started to question my gender or to learn about all of these things, like I mentioned in the beginning, it could be kind of uncomfortable. It could be like you're stepping into new territory, but it can also be exciting and very liberating. Sometimes people experience a thing called gender euphoria, right? Where it's like you're not bound by the gender binary, where you could really feel like you could express yourself without the, norms of society, without the pressure of having to show up as one or the other. You can show up as none, or you can show up as either or not. It's completely up to you. But with gender roles, with talking about gender, we have to still acknowledge that it does have a lot of challenges still. And the United Nations has this report on the gender social norms, and it's a report that's done, I'm not sure if it's done either yearly or every 5 or 10 years, but within their latest report, it's not shown any increase in, breaking down these barriers of gender norms is kind of has been the same. And so in their latest report, they show that they're not really making much progress with this goal of gender equality, which is one of their sustainability goals. In the report, there's, I think, 80 different countries that are surveyed, and this chart just shows the percentage of people that are biased within their country. And so the United States, it says here there's 50.22% of people that are living with a gender bias. And then kind of gets broken down into political. So whether people believe that women are fairly represented in politics, education, whether people believe that women have equal access to education, economic, and physical integrity, which goes into physical abuse. And so right here, we can see that there are countries that experience way more bias against women, but 50% for developing countries such as the United States is a shame. And all of us can be doing a lot much better in making sure that we're breaking down these norms. So just like a closer look at that. And this is like, I see here that it's also women that are contributing to the bias. So it's not just men. This is both men and women that took the survey, and it shows that there's not really much of a difference, right? It's not that a lot of women still do live with bias against women as well, and men still live with bias against women too. So going into a little bit more of the key findings, 9 out of 10 men and women hold fundamental biases against women. That is a huge percentage. And these are not just for the United States, this is for all of the countries surveyed. Nearly half of the world's population believe that men make better political leaders than women do. And, living in the United States, we can see how that's really true, right? We can see that there's a lot more men being represented in office. We have yet to have a woman president. And oftentimes in these conversations, a lot of women politicians are being, they're told to be quiet, and they're not really given equal opportunity to speak and express themselves than our male politicians. And lastly, 2 out of 5 people believe that men make better business executives than women do. So we can see that it is something that's really normal throughout all types of industries. It's not just in politics, it's not just in business. You can see this inequality everywhere. So I wanted to talk a little bit about intersectionality. Does anybody here know what intersectionality is or have heard of it before? See some hands going up. Yeah. So intersectionality is the acknowledgement that everyone has their own unique experiences of discrimination and oppression, and that you have to consider everything when you're talking about marginalized people. You have to consider gender, race, class, sexual orientation, physical ability, and more. And so you can see that it's not just men have these rights and women don't have these rights. It can go deeper into, well, Black women have less rights than white women, and Black transgendered women have less rights than their white trans counterparts. And so it gets really deep. It gets very, I'd like to say, like, intricate, because you can go into so many different directions when talking about intersectionality. And it really shows a lot of representation to people. And this was a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989, but it started to gain a lot of popularity, I'd say, like around 2015, 2016, you started hearing about this. And a lot of politicians were actually, I think, a little bit alarmed and intimidated by this, because some people like to think that intersectionality is just another way for people to feel victimized, for people to just get, like, you know, more attention than other people. But really, it's just kind of, you know, putting it all out there, right? These things exist everywhere. It exists in the workplace. It exists at home. It exists everywhere. So bringing it to light is just a fair thing to do. And so Kimberly Crenshaw has received a lot of backlash on this. But, you know, because of her work on intersectionality, a lot of great work or legislation has been been passed in favor of women empowerment, and as well as getting this type of curriculum into high schools, into colleges as well. Here is Kimberly Crenshaw talk a little bit about what intersectionality is, and she's here relating it more into like how you can implement it into schools. But I'd like everyone to think about how, her term of intersectionality can benefit, us wherever we are, whether that's in the workplace, with amongst our friends and family, and more.
Natalie, the sound's not coming through.
Intersectionality is just a metaphor for understanding the ways that multiple forms of inequality or disadvantage sometimes compound themselves, and they create obstacles that often are not understood within conventional ways of thinking about anti-racism or feminism or whatever social justice advocacy structures we have. Intersectionality isn't so much a grand theory, it's a prism for understanding certain kinds of problems. African American girls are 6 times more likely to be suspended than white girls. That's probably a race and a gender problem. It's not just a race problem, it's not just a gender problem. So I encourage people to think about how the convergence of race stereotypes or gender stereotypes might actually play out in the classroom, between teachers and students, between students and other students, between students and administrators, and commit themselves to understanding that as a way of intervening and providing equal educational opportunity for all students, regardless of their identity. Identity isn't simply a self-contained unit. It is a relationship between people in history, people in communities, people in institutions. So schools do a good job when they understand that and when they commit themselves to curricular development, to opportunities in the school for all students to understand the histories that have brought us to this particular moment. You can't change outcomes without understanding how they've come about. So independent schools can take the lead on that to be responsive to their student populations and to the communities out of which the students come.
So that was like a very, concise way of talking about intersectionality. And like she mentioned, that there's a way that we all relate to one another, especially like in schools, in the workplace. And so it's very important to be mindful of the ways that we're interacting to one another, the type of things that we say to one another. Even some things I think oftentimes some people joke about, certain things, maybe when it comes to race or gender, etc. But you never really know how people are going to take it. And so I would say it's kind of always better to be safe than sorry, and to really be mindful of your vocabulary and the way that you interact with other people. So going into just a brief history of women's rights, you have probably heard of like the in the 19th century when people were fighting for the right to vote, for women for the right to vote. And that led into really amazing things for women as far as getting equal opportunities into the workplace in the 20th century. That's where all of the organizing, advocacy started, really. And now in the 21st century, we can see that there definitely is an increased knowledge of women's rights and empowerment. We're still not there yet. And you can mostly see this, I'd say, in legislation against women. It's kind of like every couple of months where we hear that, reproductive rights are being talked about and debated. Like I mentioned before, it's mostly male politicians in office. So the fact that we have people that don't even have uteruses talking about our bodies is just very appalling. The fight isn't over yet. And so we often hear about like different marches at Washington, or just even like in your local communities on women's rights. And so I always, recommend people to take action within their community, or even just being on this webinar right now and being aware of what's happening, just being reminded that there's still a lot to do is a great start as well. So some more 21st century concerns. Despite the progress that we've made, disparities still exist in employment and political representation. Also, the lack of women in power perpetuates this gender disparity in the decision-making process. Like I mentioned, diverse perspectives are super essential for effective governance and decisions made. And of course, recognizing that women's experiences are shaped by factors such as race, ethnicity, disability, and more is something that we still have to be really aware of. And I'd say that there's different places around the country where it's just not as easy as how it is maybe here in New Jersey. I'm very lucky to have received an education that was pretty much very inclusive, talked about different, intersections, but there are definitely places in the United States where it's not the case, and it's actually forbidden by law to talk about certain things. If you heard about critical race theory, that's something that has been threatened in many different school systems around the country. And so, it's good to just experience a moment of gratitude for the education that we do have access to, and for the diverse stories and knowledge that we're taught. Something that's even more pressing that I feel like is really important to mention is the fact that, there's a genocide happening currently. And what does that mean for women? What does that mean for women and children? What does that mean for people, period? And so this is just a report that was made by the United Nations. Let's look at it a little bit. So it's always, I believe, can you guys see this? Great. It's always mostly women and children that are mostly affected by this genocide, war, etc. And so the United Nations came out with this report saying that 9,000 women have been killed in Gaza since early October. And what does that really mean? That could mean not having access to menstruation products such as pads, tampons, etc., which is, it's a hygiene issue. It does affect everyone. This also means that women that are most have that responsibility of, cooking or cleaning, that has all been very much threatened since this has happened. And some more particulars, every single day, the current rate of women killed is on average 63 women continue to be killed every single day. An estimated 37 mothers are killed every day, leaving their families devastated and children with diminished protection. More than 4 out of 5 women, or 84%, report that their family eats half or less of the food that they used to before this genocide began, with mothers and adult women being those tasked with sourcing food, yet eating less and least than everyone else. 4 in 5 women in Gaza indicate that at least one of their family members had to skip meals during the past week. And so the list goes on, and I would just like for all of us to just be very aware of what's happening throughout the world, because oftentimes we're very far away from this type of livelihood, and it's still affecting people everywhere. And I'd say that the fact that this is happening across seas doesn't mean that we're immune to it. I think it's just something that can happen to any of us at any time. And so I would like for all of us to continue to be in solidarity with the people everywhere, especially women and children who often get the least amount of care and concern during these times. So now I want to put a special focus on trans women. Trans women are often left out of the conversation when we're talking about women empowerment, and it's very sad, but it is very true. A report by the Human Rights Campaign called Epidemic of Violence. Actually, what is it called? It's called the Epidemic of Violence Against the Transgender and Gender Nonconforming Community in the United States. They reported that 9 in 10 trans and gender nonconforming victims were people of color. 7 in 10 were transgender women. More than 6 in 10 were Black transgender women. 78% were under the age of 35. And among those with a known killer, almost half, or 45%, were killed by a friend, family member, or sexual, romantic, intimate partner. So these statistics are super alarming. It's very devastating, and it happens every single day. I believe the life expectancy of transgender women or Black transgender women is not even 30 years old. And so it's very alarming, and it's important for us all to understand that trans women are women and have to be included in the conversation and probably put in the forefront when talking about women empowerment, because they are definitely a population of people that is definitely always targeted and discriminated against. Tori Cooper is a director of the Transgender Justice Initiative, and this is a quote inside the report where she says almost 2/3 of the victims reported on were Black trans women, a tragedy that reflects an appalling trend of violence fueled by racism, toxic masculinity, trans misogynoir, and transphobia, and the politicization of our lives. These victims had families, friends, hopes, dreams, and none of them deserved to have their lives stolen by horrific violence. And so the numbers are really alarming. And so on this report, if you have some time, please look into it. The name of it is here again. It shows, a couple of photos of the women that were killed in the last year. And it is crazy to see when you kind of see their photos and names just displayed like that. We can see the numbers, but when you put like those faces, the names to faces, it just means a little bit more, and it kind of hits home more. So I really recommend you all to look into the report and to continue to advocate for trans women. In this quote, Tori Cooper mentions trans misogynoir, and the definition of that is the particular type of oppression that exists at the intersection of transphobia, misogyny, and anti-Black racism. So going back to what we learned about intersectionality, here is a perfect example. The way that not just women are being killed or targeted, but specifically Black trans women are being targeted. And here's another video on that.
Misogynoir in 60 seconds. What is trans misogynoir? Trans misogynoir is a unique discrimination that Black women who are trans experience. Nicki Minaj and her fan base, the Barbs, have taken it upon themselves to begin to talk about Megan Thee Stallion's stature, the size of her feet, etc., etc. These are forms of trans misogynoir because they are trying to insinuate that Megan Thee Stallion is not a woman, not womanly, or not feminine. This is dangerous not only for Megan Thee Stallion, but also other Black trans women who may be treated differently by other cis-het Black women in the community. Please be mindful of how you talk about Black trans women, and also be mindful about how you talk about women in general, trying to associate them with transness, and also trying to make it seem like being trans is a bad thing, and that being trans makes you less of a woman. These are forms of misogynoir, and in particular, these are forms of trans misogynoir. Nicki, Barbs, do better.
Oh, my mic is off. I see a hand up. Julia, do you have something to say?
Yeah, I was talking about when you were talking about trans women. I think it's important to also mention that there is a group of feminism that is completely against trans women. It's the term is TERF, so trans exclusionary radical feminist, and it's essentially like a really, unfortunately, like disgusting and sad form of feminism where, because trans women were not born women, these feminists don't include them in feminism at all. So it's unfortunate to see, like women going against women and completely devalidating their problems and not including them in things like that. So, yeah, I think the intersectionality between, being trans and being a person of color and things like that, there's just a lot of groups that have a lot of hate towards them, which is very unfortunate and why it's definitely important to talk about.
Definitely, Julia. Thank you so much for mentioning that. And it definitely is really sad and gross that we have women going against women. And, like the quote mentioned before of the director of the inclusion project of this report, it did mention that it's just perpetuating racism and anti-Blackness, and it's very transphobic. And so, like, it's great that you mentioned that all of this is super connected, and it's great to be talked about. Any other thoughts on this this topic or the video or the report? Okay, let's continue. So on the screen, we have a very influential trans activist, Marsha P. or Pain O' Mine Johnson. Marsha P. Johnson is actually from Elizabeth, New Jersey, so I hold a lot of great pride in that because I'm from Elizabeth, New Jersey, and she was very influential in the Stonewall riots, in activism within the queer community, and always advocated for trans rights. Marsha P. Johnson had very humble beginnings, and definitely, was someone that should have been given more opportunities and more safety. And this video talks a little bit about her.
Turn around, you're on TV, Marsha.
Marsha P. Johnson is remembered as an activist and free spirit, with flowers or Christmas lights in her hair, and said to be one of the first rioters at Stonewall in 1969. Before the term transgender entered the lexicon, Marsha called herself a transvestite or a drag queen.
When I became a drag queen, I started to live my life as a woman.
During her life, she and other trans activists struggled to be fully accepted in the gay community, which often excluded trans people. Marsha was often homeless, supporting herself through sex work and repeatedly arrested, but she attracted many friends to help her. A fellow activist once saw Marsha asleep under a table of lilies at a flower shop. The employees welcomed her because they thought she was holy. Once, a judge asked Marsha what the P in her name stood for. She explained.
Ain't no mind Johnson. Marsha ain't no mind Johnson.
The judge, charmed, said, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. She was released. She was well known in New York's Greenwich Village, where she became an icon after the Stonewall riots.
Girls ever come in drag to Stonewall. Stonewall rioting started. That's when I started my rioting.
As one story recounts, during the riots, Marsha threw a shot glass into a mirror at the bar after police entered, shouting, "I got my civil rights." Marsha was a founding member of the Gay Liberation Front, and she formed STAR in 1970 with Sylvia Rivera, a transgender woman and activist. It was revolutionary in its direct support for the trans community. Together, they opened Star House, a shelter for homeless LGBTQ youth. She was also an advocate for those affected by HIV and AIDS, and rejected the stigma and shame associated with the virus.
I think to stand as close to them as you can and help out as much as you can. Including myself, I have HIV.
She remained devoted to her Christian faith throughout her life. Friends say she could be found praying in various churches, at times dressed in velvet, throwing glitter. Marsha died in 1992 at the age of 46. At the time, police said she'd taken her own life, a claim friends disputed.
I mean, it's hard for me to believe that she would commit suicide.
The case was reopened in 2012 as a possible homicide. Like Marsha, trans women continue to suffer from long-standing discrimination and violence. Her legacy reflects the ongoing struggle for transgender people to be safe and receive equal rights.
People to realize that we're all brothers and sisters as human beings in the human race.
So as you can see, Marsha was very influential in trans rights and women liberation as well. And unfortunately, the same case with a lot of trans women and Black trans women. Marsha was killed and thrown into the Hudson River. And so these stories are very real, and I would like for everyone to keep trans women in mind when we're talking about women's liberation and women's empowerment. Whitney says the death of Marsha P. Johnson is a great deep dive documentary into her life for those that want to learn more about her. It's on Netflix. I did hear about that documentary, and just a little story. Like I mentioned, Marsha P. Johnson is from Elizabeth, New Jersey, and in 2020, a group of friends and I, we kind of were pressuring the city hall to put a what is it called? A statue of Marsha P. Johnson in our city center, because we have Christopher Columbus statues in our city. And so we wanted to replace those statues with Marsha P. Johnson. And we didn't get any support from the city, unfortunately. We did, a friend of mine did speak to the family members of Marsha P. Johnson, a brother, or I believe it was an uncle. And they were actually against that documentary because I don't think they got the support of the family or something like that. But it is like other great way of getting some more information. I would advise people just to look a little bit more deeper into it, and watch more of like her own interviews, and read more about her quotes. But we were successful in getting a mural up of Marsha P. Johnson. It is in Midtown Elizabeth, so if you're ever in that area, please check it out. But yeah, she definitely deserves more light and to always be remembered. So finally, I'd just like to talk a little bit about some ways that we can be more inclusive. One, just continue to explore your own identity. Ask yourself some questions to get yourself thinking more about your feminine or masculine side. And if you choose to express that in whatever way, know that you're not the only one that's doing that. There are so many people around you that are probably interested in exploring their gender identity and expression a little bit more. And so that is a great way of being more inclusive to yourself and other people. Also, have conversations with your friends and family. It can be kind of uncomfortable, I'd say, sometimes to talk about these things, but at least you're trying, at least you're, rewriting your narrative or the narrative of people around you into a more positive one and inclusive one. Let women speak. This is super simple, but it goes a long way. Let women have the mic. Let Black and Brown, Indigenous women have the mic. Give them opportunities. Hear their stories, don't question them, respect them, and continue to learn more about the ways that you can support them. And lastly, change your vocabulary. So change the way that you speak to yourself about your gender identity and expression, and the way that you speak about other people's gender identity and expression. Continue to educate yourself about women's rights and gender equality and gender empowerment. Support policies that promote equal opportunities for wages and representation. Like we all know, it's an election year for president. Whether you choose to vote or choose not to vote, that is completely up to you. I'm not going to tell you to do that, but I am going to tell you to take action within your local community to make sure that you have a voice. Amplify voices, like I mentioned. Share success stories of empowered women to inspire others. We talked about challenging norms and stereotypes. This can be difficult to do, I'd say, in places like your workplace or like in schools, but when you have people beside you that are also passionate about it, it's a little bit less scary. Continue to support leaders within the community that are women. And the last one, mentorship. I think this is a great one. I did a lot of mentorship throughout my life, and I find it to be really rewarding, but also really essential to young women. It's really important when people have just like a role model that they can look up to. And I'm sure all of you here will be amazing role models to young women and girls. And so continue to do your part to inspire people everywhere. Lastly, I'd like to leave on another quote of Bell Hooks. Beloved community is formed not by the eradication of difference, but by its affirmation, by each of us claiming the identities and cultural legacies that shape who we are and how we live in the world. Bell Hooks passed away in 2021, and I hope that we can all take these words with us into our everyday lives and read more into her work and the work of other women, especially Black, Brown, and Indigenous women of color. Thank you, everyone. I would love to hear some questions or any thoughts that we're feeling. The mic is open for everyone.
Really, really great presentation, Natalie. I really enjoyed this one. I love the look too. It reminds me a little bit of Keith Haring, which is very okay, you can't see it, whatever, which is very fitting for the ending part. Yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. And your voice is very calming.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you, everyone, for the sweet comments. This was really fun to make, and shout out to Canva for the theme. Not my art, by the way, but I really did like, even if we look at the photos, right? Like when I first look at it, I saw like these 3-eyed people and 1-eyed people. I'm like, what is this? But it kind of felt fitting because sometimes I feel like, you know, I as a woman, I feel like sometimes I don't fit in, or like I feel like a monster sometimes. Like, what's the right way of being? What's the right way of behaving, etc. But it kind of just embraces that type of difference. And honestly, like a lot of the girls here in these photos are smiling, but some of them are not. Some of them are sad, or they're frowning, or they have a, just not a smiling face. And that kind of just shows you that you don't have to always smile to people on the street. You know, I've been someone that on the street when I'm walking, I've heard some men say, oh, smile, give me a smile. Like, why do you look so mad? Why do you look so sad? But this is just a reminder to everyone, not just women, but anyone, anything. You can express yourself as you wish and don't have to give explanations to anyone. So I'll leave it at that. I hope to, give another presentation like this soon. And thank you all for being super engaging and for opening your minds to this kind of conversation.